Hello, and welcome to ITI's Insights Live briefing, How President Trump's AI Action Plan Drives U.S. Tech Leadership. My name is Janae Washington, and I'm the Senior Director of Communications at ITI. Following the release of President Trump's AI Action Plan, ITI policy experts today will explore how the plan can maintain the United States position as a global AI leader. A few housekeeping items before we get started. This conversation is on the record and will be recorded. Please submit questions through the Q&A function throughout the conversation. And if you need more information on ITI, you can find that on our website at www.itic.org. I'll now pass the mic to our moderator, Margaret McCarthy, ITI Vice President of Government Affairs, to get us started. Thank you.
Thanks, Janae, and thank you everyone who took the time to join us for today's briefing on the White House release of the AI Action Plan, which we were so excited to see last Wednesday. I'm joined by two of my colleagues at ITI, Courtney Lang, Vice President of Policy, and Zach Royster, Senior Manager of Public Sector. Here at ITI, we're uniquely positioned in the AI policy space as a trade association that represents 80 companies across the full AI stack. So our member companies are doing everything from designing and building the semiconductors, data centers, and cloud infrastructure that power AI systems, to developing the innovative AI models and integrating AI into products and services for consumers and businesses alike. So we're really looking forward to today's discussion about how the Trump administration's action plan and the 3 executive orders signed last week are launching a new chapter in AI policy and setting the course for continued US AI leadership. So let's get started. Courtney and Zach, before we dive into the details of what we saw coming out of the White House last week, could you kick us off with some opening thoughts? Share a little bit about why the action plan is so important from the tech industry's perspective. Courtney, I'll start with you.
Sure. Happy to, Margaret. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Excited to unpack this a little bit further. I think, from an initial perspective, the AI action plan is something that we have been waiting on since January, when the president put out the initial executive order where he rescinded the prior administration's executive orders and affiliated actions, put out his new one, and directed the development of this AI action plan. We've been waiting for kind of this administration's vision of what AI policy will look like moving forward. And so to see the action plan and finally have it here, it provides us with that initial sense of direction from the administration. I think, as we've seen kind of happen in the broader AI policy conversation over the last 6 or so months since the France AI Action Summit, there has definitely been a shift in tone in the policy conversation, and one that has been more focused, I would say now, on really promoting innovation and adoption of AI technology, with perhaps a little bit less emphasis on managing risks related to AI. And basically every pillar of the plan demonstrates that that is, in fact, the Trump administration's goal. They are very focused on promoting innovation, promoting adoption of the technology, all in, ultimate service of ensuring that the United States dominates in the AI ecosystem. And so, I think from a broad-based perspective, we see that come throughout the action plan. That's something, of course, that ITI and our member companies are appreciative of. And there's really quite a lot packed into 28 pages. So looking forward to chatting about that a bit further. But from my perspective, I think this really solidifies the initial vision for what AI policy is going to look like under the Trump administration moving forward.
Great. Zach, were there any particular areas of the action plan that you were focused on or happy to see given the AI policy work you do at ITI?
Yeah, of course. And thanks, Courtney, Margaret. Happy to be here today and completely concur. There's a lot to unpack here in the short amount of time we have. But I think from what my perspective and what I was looking at when kind of reading through the plan, what really stood out to me was just the emphasis within the plan on really accelerating adoption of AI within the federal government, to make it more innovative, more efficient, more responsive, and really make sure it's meeting constituents' needs. I think, what stood out to me is historically, the government's technology has not really kept pace with innovation. And so in this plan, the pillars really focus on making sure that policy is not lagging too far behind innovation. Now, relatedly, like fostering that environment of AI innovation and adoption really requires the right infrastructure to support that growth. And so dedicating dedicating an entire pillar to building AI infrastructure was really exciting and something ITI has been advocating for. Today's infrastructure is not really designed to support this increased demand for AI and energy long term. So this renewed focus was great to see. I think just more to the specifics of like at a high level in the plan, Pillar 1, really awesome to see the inclusions for developing a more efficient public service delivery through use of AI, but also in supporting the national security mission within the Department of Defense and the intelligence community. This is going to be really critical for advancing AI leadership. As I mentioned, really also honed in Pillar 2 on reducing barriers to permitting, constructing data centers and the energy generation projects more quickly. One thing I'll touch on later, but I wanted to highlight up top is there is an entire section dedicated to workforce development. I think it's great to see that the plan recognized the need to not only build things faster through an innovation-friendly environment, but to create more jobs and to train the skilled personnel that you need to actually do them. So as Courtney mentioned, a lot of great things in there, and really excited to kind of unpack this with you all today.
Great. Well, Zach, you teed up a lot of the themes that I know we're hoping to spend some more time on during the hour we have today. So let's talk a little bit more about the first bucket, which, as you noted, is about accelerating AI innovation. So, the White House has given us a really clear signal about the importance of making sure that the adoption and use of AI is something that we're contemplating both across the public sector, government use, and in the commercial sector. So, Zach, you mentioned some of this in your opening comments, but were there some particular actions in the plan that you think are really going to help with that driving that government use of AI?
Yeah, definitely. There was a lot in the plan that's going to help drive government use. I mean, we were really encouraged that many of the key issues that were included in our comments earlier this year to OSTP concerning government adoption were addressed here. The way I was viewing this portion of the plan is it's really building on the solid foundation that was laid in the April OMB memorandums on AI acquisition and use that were really focused then on breaking down barriers to both interagency collaboration, but also a harmonized approach to government adoption. Some specific things up top, with the government's need to kind of make sure there's enough talent available, the portion in the recommendation that emphasized a talent exchange program to send staff out on assignment to help incorporate and integrate AI capabilities was great to see. I think the recommendation that really stood out to me, though, in my work here at ITI was the mandate of creating a procurement toolbox for AI by GSA, which is really interesting when you consider it in the context of the broader acquisition reform landscape going on within the federal government right now, whether that's GSA's OneGov strategy, the executive orders on contract consolidation, or the Revolutionary FAR Overhaul Initiative. Certainly, the government has had a lot of tools available to them to purchase great technology for many years now. But procurement processes really need to evolve if we're going to match the pace of technological change and ensure that the government can access cutting-edge AI capabilities quickly and before products end up outdated or end of life. I think it'll be really interesting to see how the mandate for that toolbox actually aligns with some of the activity in the Revolutionary FAR Overhaul Initiative, like the practitioner albums. And this is where we feel that industry can really plug in and provide a lot of value because there are resources we can offer as they create these tools for government to drive uniformity in how they purchase technology, such as commercial best practices, procurement trainings, and more that we would be happy to provide. So that's how we really saw up top some of the great things on procurement and public sector adoption.
Great. Well, as you mentioned, a lot of things that we're looking forward still to come there. I guess maybe if you could just elaborate a little bit further, Zach, how do we see some of the AI specific actions and activities that the action plan is talking about fitting in with that bigger picture need for federal IT modernization? Obviously these AI tools are going to be dependent on the tech infrastructure, which, we know a lot of agencies are in many cases relying on, out of date or not best commercially available solutions.
Yeah, you really touched on it well there. And I think when I was looking through the plan, while it's great to see that the government's focusing on adopting AI, using more AI applications and technologies within government service, I think one thing that is really clear is success is ultimately going to be determined by the government's ability to invest in and transform their IT infrastructure so that it can fully benefit from emerging tech capabilities like AI and beyond. So it's great that the plan calls for high impact use cases to be piloted. But I think what it's going to need to do to speed up adoption and scale beyond just the pilot phase is it's going to need to improve its data quality, the infrastructure that's available there to deliver better results. Because as you just mentioned a moment ago, too many government systems right now are outdated or over-reliant on highly customized solutions, which not only drives inefficiencies within the government, it also slows down service delivery. So the cost of maintaining legacy systems is pretty expensive, and this can also create some vulnerabilities that can be exploited, such as adversarial uses of AI. So that's why we're really focusing on right now the need to drive industry collaboration, because open dialogue is really important for identifying what investments may be needed to really build that modern data environment that can help AI to scale.
Great. Well, last question before I try to turn over to Courtney and put her in the hot seat for a minute. There was also an executive order that President Trump signed last Wednesday related to government procurement of AI, in particular focused on the need to ensure that frontier LLM developers provide the government with systems that are free from ideological bias. Zach, can you talk about how industry sees this moving forward? What kind of information do companies need from the government side to understand what the administration is going to try to operationalize with this particular executive order?
Yeah, of course. I think from the public sector's perspective, when I look at this, when considering what the impact may be on a federal contractor, for example. Now, ideally, any new requirements that the government is going to apply, they need to be done so consistently, government-wide, and through a rulemaking process through the FAR that allows for robust public commentary from industry and any other stakeholders that may want to offer feedback. What we really do not want to see here is each individual agency coming up with their own unique contracting requirements, including their own definitions of what is objective or what is top-down ideological bias. That consistency right there makes it extremely difficult for industry to actually comply, especially when they then look into differing agency-specific requirements that may be attempted to implement. So what ITI is really going to be looking at over the next few months, specifically with the executive order calling for draft guidance to be implemented within 120 days. So I guess that's around like November or so. We're really going to be looking at what does that guidance include, what's in there, what factors are going to be contributing to the development of these requirements. And that's going to be really important for the future of procurement and making sure that we can get these models, these innovative capabilities in the hands of the government workforce more quickly.
Great. Well, switching gears over to Courtney. Courtney, this first section of the AI action plan that we've been talking about accelerating AI innovation, it also talks about where the federal government is needed to help create the conditions where private sector-led innovation can flourish. There's a ton in here, but one area in particular that ITI has been very engaged in is around testing and evaluation of AI systems. Could you talk a little bit about what the action plan recommends on this front and why we think it's so important?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you noted, I think testing and evaluation has been an area that we at ITI and our member companies have been very, very engaged in over the last several years. One of the things that we had recommended in our response to the initial RFI on the AI action plan was really ensuring that there was a role for the newly renamed Center for AI Standards and Innovation, formerly the AI Safety Institute, in progressing testing and evaluation specifically on frontier AI models, or those models that really present the most advanced capabilities on the leading edge of AI. And so we were really happy to see that there was a specific section in the AI action plan that designated this as a priority policy activity for the CAISY, and then to also see that the broader National Institute of Standards and Technology was recognized as well in here as something really important. I think with testing and eval more broadly, it is super critical to advancing innovation and adoption. And so that's another reason that we were really pleased to see that in here. In order to facilitate a robust ecosystem, we need the metrics. Our companies need the metrics to be able to measure both the performance of AI systems, the robustness, the way in which the systems are acting in a consistent fashion. And that has been something that NIST and CAISY more specifically has been, invested in doing previously, but to see that kind of doubled down on in the action plan, I think is something that, we're really happy about moving forward. We'd previously, as I said, sent a letter really encouraging the continued work on this front. And I think, we'll see at what pace some of this happens, but I do think producing guidance, working with industry to produce guidance that is going to be effective and operational and able to be operationalized by companies. Sorry, that was a mouthful there. Is going to be incredibly important and helpful to really fostering trust, which in turn will then promote innovation. And so, I think we're looking forward as ITI and as industry to working with the KC as they kind of move forward on producing this guidance so that different both agencies, but also companies in the ecosystem can leverage it in order to assess their model's capabilities and what they are doing.
Great. Well, one of the other areas that I know was touched on in this adoption section was around scientific discovery. And, Zach mentioned some of these themes in his comment around, the use of federal data, some of the really exciting possibilities that we see from the power of this technology. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that point and where there were areas in the action plan that, we thought were a good step forward?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things in here that I think we had been supportive of in our OSTP comments and that, ideally will be helpful to advancing innovation and adoption moving forward. You mentioned kind of the focus on advancing the science of AI and advancing kind of scientific progress with AI. I think those are two separate but related areas. On the scientific progress side, I think there's a very clear recognition that science in particular can benefit from artificial intelligence. And so, something that we've been supportive of at ITI is the kind of ongoing efforts on Capitol Hill, led by Senators Heinrich and Rounds, to kind of advance scientific progress with AI. And this AI action plan recommendation kind of squares very nicely with a lot of that work to really kind of focus on how AI can be used to progress scientific discovery and advance benefits more broadly for society writ large. And so, there's a couple of different policy actions looking at both NSF and DOE and other federal partners to invest in kind of automated cloud-enabled labs. There's a focus on kind of incentivizing researchers to release more high-quality data sets. This is going to be also very critical to facilitating training of AI systems and future development of kind of AI enabled progress. So I think those are some areas that, we're excited to see. Obviously, as a tech industry, we're providing a lot of the infrastructure for researchers to be able to leverage and build upon to really promote this area, but that's something that we were pleased to see. And then in terms of federal data sets more broadly and access to data, I mean, this is again foundational to the development of a robust AI ecosystem. High quality data in particular is a precursor for AI systems that perform in a helpful and effective way. And so making more data available in formats that are machine readable is something that we've been advocating for quite a long time. And so we're happy to see kind of a continued emphasis on in the context of this AI action plan. And I think those are all areas where we're looking forward to working with the government to realize.
Great. So in addition to some of these positive use cases and applications of the technology that you were talking about, Courtney, there are also these concerns about adversarial use of AI, which the plan does address in a section talking about the need to bolster critical infrastructure cybersecurity. Could you talk about what's needed to realize some of the things contemplated in this section of the plan, particularly around continued cyber information sharing between government and industry?
Yeah, and so I think, this kind of shifts us nicely into the second pillar around AI infrastructure, where some of the cybersecurity recommendations fall. Again, something that we had recommended was to include a section on kind of this relationship between cybersecurity and artificial intelligence as the Trump administration was thinking through kind of what their overall vision for AI would be. And I think, this section focuses both on using AI for cyber defense. There's some recommendations there, and then also on improving AI security more generally. And I think one of the kind of specific recommendations that caught our attention was around the creation of an AI ISAC or information sharing for artificial intelligence threats. I think it's important to note we already have an IT ISAC where the IT sector shares threat information, but it's really critical that to the extent that they are thinking about kind of creating this AI ISAC, that we have kind of a successful information sharing framework in place. And that's really predicated upon congressional reauthorization of CISA 2015, which is something that, again, we've been advocating for some time now. So to the extent that this AI ISAC is a vision that we're trying to advance and realize, it's really, really important that we have kind of that foundation for information sharing in place.
Great. Well, while we're on the topic of infrastructure, Zach, let's dive in a little bit more into this second pillar of the plan, building American AI infrastructure. I think one clear message that we've heard across the membership at ITI from the U.S. tech sector is about the really critical power needs and building out the data centers and the other infrastructure that all of these AI systems rely upon. So could you talk a little bit about how you see this section of the action plan and what are some of the specific things that the administration is talking about to secure AI and energy dominance?
Yeah, definitely can do that. And I agree that we've heard this loud and clear from our members that it's really important to move a little bit faster in how we're actually breaking ground and building things. So I think it's important to start before we go into the specifics of the plan, just to recognize that this is not like the foundation. Like the administration has actually been doing a lot of work in the first 6 months to lead on energy and infrastructure development since it came into the office. Just for example, we've seen the White House, on day one, President Trump issue an executive order on unleashing or declaring a national energy emergency. In April, the Department of Energy released a request for information to kind of explore the use of federal lands for rapid data center construction, all the way to May's series of executive orders on boosting domestic nuclear energy production. To the last week's release of the action plan. So while the president's plan is the most comprehensive action to date, it's very clear that this administration is moving with a real sense of urgency and understands that if you don't get regulatory barriers out of the way and get shovels into the ground a lot quicker, the infrastructure needed to support AI's growth is going to be simply built elsewhere, which would cede US AI leadership in this global AI race. So I think in regards to some of the specifics in the plan, there was a lot of things included in there that were key actions ITI has been advocating for quite some time. Just for example, reducing permitting barriers that may have blocked or delayed new projects from breaking ground, including categorical exclusions for data center construction if it doesn't make a significant impact on the environment, expanding the FAST-41 program, and leveraging AI capabilities to actually speed up the process within government for permitting review and making sure that we're really taking advantage of the capabilities that technology offers as well. I think one thing that really stood out for me in the plan was the section on developing a grid that matches the pace of AI innovation, because here really what we saw was it encourages the development of a strategic blueprint to kind of understand, how do we enhance and expand grid resiliency and capacity. The thing there was that it's still a bit early to know what the real impact of this is, because there wasn't any specific deliverables or timelines included here. And a lot of this work is going to need to be done in close coordination with state governments and public utilities commissions. So while the inclusion of the blueprint is a really great thing to see, it's not immediately clear to us like what this is going to look like in practice. Also, I mentioned up top that workforce development is a really key piece of the puzzle here. And we see that referenced and kind of realized here in Pillar 2. This is important because there's a workforce shortage going on right now where we're seeing, demand far outstrip supply when it comes to the skilled personnel like electricians, plumbers, welders, construction workers. So seeing this part of the plan really try to address that gap and create jobs and train the personnel we need to do that was an important milestone for kind of making sure we're moving with the speed that we need to.
Great. Well, I'm going to tag in here, Zach. We had a question from somebody in the audience. Can someone talk about the Trump order on permitting? How does the order fit into broader NEPA reform efforts? And referencing some of those related proposals that we're also seeing on Capitol Hill. So I'm happy to dive in here a little bit. Obviously very excited to also see that there's a ton of bipartisan congressional momentum around permitting reform. I think this impacts not just data centers, but really all of the technology infrastructure, whether that's, fiber deployment or the tech manufacturing, really all of the things that our sector is looking to invest and build here in the United States. And, certainly view those as complementary to the things that the White House has been announcing. There are probably some things that the White House is going to need Congress's help on, whether that's concerns about, the judicial review under some of these environmental laws, or maybe getting into some of the issues that you were talking about a little bit, Zach, about these delays at the state and local level. So I think we view this as all very positive momentum and hopefully pointing in a similar direction. Maybe I'll turn that over to you, Zach, a little bit for follow-up. You were talking about the FAST-41 process, and the president also signed this executive order in addition to what was in the AI action plan. So, sort of, what do you see as the next steps building on, in addition to implementation of what the White House has outlined here, but where do we need to go a little bit further?
Yeah, no, happy to kind of expand on that a little bit. And I think I appreciate you pointing out the FAST-41 program there, because I think from our perspective, this was a really great recommendation included in the plan that we think actually offers a real opportunity to continue to build on. Just for context, the FAST-41 program, it's not typically covered data center projects or data center related projects such as co-located energy projects. But it's been a critical tool for accelerating permitting for large scale infrastructure projects at the federal level. Now, it does this by placing eligible projects on a dashboard, which is managed by the Permitting Council, to offer greater coordination, transparency, and accountability there. Essentially, it really provides project sponsors with the certainty they need to make sure they can understand when they're going to reach a certain milestone in the project timeline for construction and permitting. Now, expanding the program to include data centers as a covered project was a step in the right direction. But I think where we can build on this here is to keep in mind that permitting is really complex and it requires navigating, as you mentioned, a series of approvals from different jurisdictions at the federal, state, and local levels. Right now, we're seeing a lot of adoption at the federal level of the FAST-41 program and how it's really improving coordination between agencies, but we're not seeing that adoption with the state and local agencies for the program. I think some of that might simply just be due to a lack of awareness that state permitting agencies actually are eligible to kind of opt in and receive all of the benefits of FAST-41 if there is a covered project in their jurisdiction. But from our perspective, if the U.S. is really going to move fast and build things, federal permitting is just one piece of the puzzle. You really need to enable better coordination across all levels of the government, federal, state, and local, to speed up those project timelines. And as I mentioned earlier, get shovels in the ground quicker. There's a really nice foundation there laid by FAST-41 that can be used and built on. So it's really about using the tools at our disposal to make sure we're being as effective as we can.
Great. I guess maybe last question for now on the infrastructure and energy front, Zach. But maybe we'll come back if there's some more questions in the Q&A. But so you talked a little bit about some of the work that the administration's been really doing since day one about promoting alternative energy sources. Could you talk a little bit about the mix that's needed? Really, how do we address some of the short-term needs that our industry is looking at in terms of power, since some of these projects we know are pretty significant and may take some years to come online?
Yeah, of course. So I think just to highlight in the plan, it really notes the importance of accelerating very quickly the amount of energy generation that is available to us for enabling and powering these projects. We've been really encouraged by some of what the Administrator Zeldin and Secretary White have done so far, such as, as I mentioned earlier, the renewed focus on domestic nuclear energy production as a key component of baseload power. Just including, back in February, Secretary Wright actually rolled out a secretarial order on unleashing the golden era of American energy dominance. And in that plan, one of the very first recommendations made was on energy addition, not subtraction, where I think he said that, we really need more energy. That the fact of the matter is we need more energy, not less of it. And from our perspective, we agree with that approach. And in fact, have been discussing the importance of this, as you mentioned, Margaret, the diverse mix of energy sources that we need, or some has referred to it in all of the above approach. It's great that the plan focuses on the need for more sufficient power generation, but the reality is that we really need to look at ensuring near-term available sources of energy are part of that solution. Some of the investments being made in nuclear or advanced geothermal or even fusion really do need to be part of this conversation, but those likely won't be here until 2030 or later. So there needs to be a focus on a competitive market for near-term solutions for adding power onto the grid where there are serious capacity or supply constraints right now on other potential sources. Just as one example, new gas turbines right now are currently experiencing multi-year backlogs, actually. So a recent report that I think is kind of put this into perspective is the U.S. the U.S. Energy Information Administration, excuse me, noted in a recent report that 80% of new generation last year in 2024 and 81% of the projected new generation in 2025 has come from renewable sources such as solar or battery storage, because they're not only available, they're actually affordable. A lot of this growth is coming from Texas with its own grid and market competition among producers. So when the plan talks about needing to develop a modern grid that can match the pace of innovation, what we really need is to make sure we are appropriately leveraging all available sources of energy so that we can move faster and meet demand now in the short term and not, 5 years from now.
Great. Well, think we covered that second pillar really well, and thanks for all the insights, Zach. Switching gears, Courtney, wanted to come over to you to talk about the third pillar of the action plan, which discusses how the U.S. is going to lead in international AI diplomacy and security. So obviously here at ITI, we're a global organization. We're talking about this plan here in the United States, but understand that it's going to have ramifications across the markets and with the governments that we work with around the world. So can you comment about what kind of impact you see now that we have this vision from the Trump administration? How is this, going to be received in international fora and in capitals around the world?
Sure. Happy to talk a little bit about the third pillar. Not to keep harping on the response that we provided to OSTP a couple of months ago, but I do think it's really foundational to kind of remember that as a baseline. And so, one of the things, as you noted, that we had recommended and are now happy to see included in here is this notion of international diplomacy and kind of working with international partners. Especially because AI is not being developed in a vacuum, right? There are countries all over the world that are thinking about how to leverage the benefits of AI while also addressing the risks. And I think, the messaging here does send a pretty strong message to our allies. When you read some of the recommended policy actions, there are both policy actions that are focused on kind of engaging in multilateral bodies, working in places like ISO and IEC to make sure that standards are developed with kind of American and democratic values in mind to counter authoritarian influences. And then we also have, parts of the action plan that are focused more on promoting the export of U.S. AI technologies internationally. And then with that as well, some recommendations around kind of similarly restricting the exports of particular goods to adversarial nations. And so there's kind of a two-sided policy coin in here. One is focused on kind of promoting the full stack of AI technologies, and then the other is focused more on protecting, which is very much aligned with what the Trump administration has messaged thus far. I think many of you saw there were executive orders that were signed as a part of this. The one executive order, that came out specific to exporting the full stack of American AI technology is intended to create a program on American AI exports at the Department of Commerce. And it's really seeking to pull together, again, the full stack of AI technology. So not just the AI models, but the hardware, the software, the systems that are required to kind of fulsomely deploy AI elsewhere and sell that to third countries. And so, this executive order is very clearly focused on ensuring American AI leadership. And I think it does take a very different approach, perhaps, than what we saw in the prior administration, where there was a major focus on, the AI diffusion rule, but kind of the protection of technology being exported to third countries. And here we're seeing kind of a departure from that and a real recognition that, in fact, exporting US technology can be critical to really promoting and countering potential authoritarian influences overseas. And so, there's a couple of different things in there that we're kind of looking forward to see how the Commerce Department in particular works to unpack. But more generally, I think key point here is that we're happy to see that there was a recognition here of, the U.S. continuing to interact with partners and allies, though, of course, there is a real focus on the U.S. leading in those conversations.
Great. Well, I want to pick on some of the themes you mentioned here, Courtney, and also some of the questions that have come up in the Q&A. So, you mentioned the executive order that the president signed about, promoting the American AI tech stack, and also that there's in this same section of the plan some discussion around, controlling our foreign adversaries' access to American AI. Some other areas that one of our participants raised is discussing how the president's trade policies and tariffs may also, impact US AI leadership. I think particularly around the ability to continue to build that kind of infrastructure domestically. So I guess could you talk a little bit more about how do we see these sort of different threads coming together? How is the administration going to thread that needle? Obviously, I think the overarching theme that we saw here is about promoting American AI. But how does this fit in with sort of trying to align with our friends and allies, and making sure that all of these policies are promoting that overall goal?
Yeah, so there's kind of a lot of pieces in here. I think, the first part of this is, like I said, there is a major focus on promoting US tech abroad, and totally hear this participant that some of the broader trade policy efforts could in fact raise costs on a lot of the inputs. I think that's important to keep in mind. That being said, I mean, I do think based on, what's in the action plan, the administration is trying to kind of strike this balance between promoting AI, American tech exports, and then, also protecting against, the diffusion of some of these technologies to adversarial nations. I think there's an element of restriction that is necessary to protecting national security. And so, that will be one part of the plan, as we've advocated for previously. I mean, we really think that targeted risk-based restrictions are the most appropriate way to move forward with some of these export controls. We're still waiting to see kind of what the new AI diffusion rule, for lack of a better phrase at this moment, will look like from the Trump administration. But I do think kind of as they're proceeding, we heard, the Commerce Secretary say they're willing to hear from and work with industry to develop a regime that is, most appropriate to meeting both the objectives of industry and government and protecting national security, but ensuring American exports. So I think that's one part of it. And I mean, with regard to trade policy more generally, I think that's one of the reasons why we continue to advocate for, as soon as an appropriate deal is kind of reached with many of these international partners, to kind of walk those tariffs back, so that we can address some of the increased costs on the input side of the equation. But I do think it's going to be a balancing act here to really achieve those dual objectives, and it's something that will likely be subject to continued conversations in the months to come.
Certainly, yes, especially with August 1st later this week. So, in that last answer, Courtney, we were talking a little bit about alignment and global harmonization. So I wanted to switch gears back to something that came up to my mind earlier in the conversation, which is about the patchwork that we're seeing here domestically in the United States, with a lot of individual U.S. states moving forward on AI regulation, AI legislation. certainly that's something that was also a focus of conversation here in DC on Capitol Hill during the debate over the AI moratorium and the reconciliation bill. So could you talk a little bit about what the AI action plan says about this emerging patchwork of state regulations? Also, I think there were some interesting comments from President Trump at his speech at the event last Wednesday. I think that was maybe the first time we've heard him say personally, directly, to speak to this emerging issue and the need for some kind of federal framework.
Yeah, so the action plan contemplates this kind of pretty strongly right at the outset under Pillar 1 and accelerating AI innovation. There is a section specifically focused on removing red tape and onerous regulation. And in this section, there are some recommended policy actions that seem to speak to some of this kind of concern around the proliferation of a variety of AI regulations at the state level. There is kind of one policy action that's recommended to the FCC where they are, in theory, supposed to investigate whether any state level laws interfere with their ability to act upon the Communications Act of 1934. So to some extent, that seems to be getting at some of this, and would be interested in your thoughts, Margaret, as someone who has been in the telecom space as well, kind of the implications of that. But then there's kind of this other overall provision that's to be led by OMB in conjunction with some of the other federal agencies that have kind of funding to allocate to states to really review legislation or regulation at the state level, and then kind of make a decision about funding based on whether or not they evaluate that state's regulation to be particularly onerous or kind of overly burdensome in a way that would actually preclude the funding from making an impact in that state. So I think, we're seeing some of that in the AI action plan. Obviously, there isn't kind of a clear direction right now to Congress in particular. But again, I'd be interested in your thoughts too on kind of whether there's a role for Congress here moving forward after kind of what happened with the moratorium and then some of the direction that we see given in the AI action plan in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to go back to your earlier question, the FCC actually has longstanding authority that they've used, not to throw out a boogeyman word, but was part of the underlying authority during the net neutrality debates in years past about removing barriers to infrastructure and broadband deployment. So, I think that's something the FCC has historically looked at in other, kind of ICT tech infrastructure contexts. So we're certainly looking forward to learning more about what they might be undertaking with that inquiry. But, I think giving federal policymakers a clear perspective on some of the barriers that are being erected at the state level, I think is certainly a helpful foundational point, particularly as you mentioned, Courtney, fully expecting this is an issue Congress is going to turn back to, whether or not it's going to be structured along the lines of what we saw around the AI moratorium earlier this year, which was, in some ways influenced by the unique procedural and process requirements of that legislative process around the reconciliation bill. But, some of the things that we know leading lawmakers have been looking at are, potential kind of regulatory sandbox proposals, maybe looking at a shorter term pause on state AI regulatory activity to, I think, really give Congress some urgency about putting a federal framework in place. But, really think one thing that did come out of the conversations on Capitol Hill earlier this year is a recognition of the potential harms from conflicting state level activity, and also an understanding that lawmakers really do think that there are some basic guardrails that need to be in place at the federal level. I'm gonna switch over to some of the questions in the Q&A, since I know we're getting kind of close to the end of our time with you all. So Zach, if I can come over to you, we had a question about how to think about the action plan if you are a major government contractor. So what should your company, if you're a government contractor, be doing this week that you weren't doing before the plan was announced?
Yeah, I think for clarity, I couldn't tell. I think it might be if you're not a major government contractor, but I'm not. I think that's what the question was touching at. But I think the
Oh,
answer is kind of
sorry.
yeah. I think that the answer is kind of the same either way. And I'll caveat this that I'm not a business development person, but from a like policy perspective, what you should be doing when thinking about this is one thing we've really heard from this administration loud and clear is, they really are looking at how the services and the products that your companies can offer the government to drive efficiency and optimize service delivery really align with those administration priorities. So really thinking about how you are telling your story to the federal government to kind of think about like what are the actual use cases for your products, your services that can deliver on what the administration is trying to achieve. I think from another perspective, now is actually a great time to kind of be thinking about this because we're going through one of, not one of the largest reform to federal kind of purchasing guidelines during the FAR overhaul that we've seen, since 1984 when the FAR was first kind of enacted on April 1st and went into effect. So I would say, like, as you're starting to think through these things, there are a lot of opportunities for the public to be commenting to the FAR Council and submitting their feedback on, what industry needs from the government as they start to rewrite these purchasing guidelines. So I would say, at a high level, from my perspective, the two things you can do, just kind of recap, is one, make sure you're thinking more critically about what your story is, how they can help drive efficiency and optimize service delivery in government. And two, really use those tools at your disposal in this historic moment we're in to kind of engage with the government, offer them the best practices from industry that you see that can enable greater and quicker adoption of technologies. And yeah, just really provide that feedback as they go through this process. So those are the things that I would say are probably most important.
Great. Um, uh, Thanks so much, Zach. Um, Switching over to a couple other questions that showed up in the chat. Courtney, a few questions about AI training data and copyright issues. So, this wasn't an area that I think the AI action plan took head on, but was something that was referenced in President Trump's speech last Wednesday. So, maybe you could just sort of give us an overview. Where do we see these issues around the use of data playing out right now? Is it in the courts on Capitol Hill? What are the sort of key places for folks to be paying attention to?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And certainly I think because the action plan did not address kind of this issue head on, it seemed to indicate, at least initially, that the executive branch was kind of leaving this to play out in the courts. As the attendee mentioned, there are, multiple kind of lawsuits that are unfolding, and different kind of interpretations of the fair use statute coming out as a result of those cases. So in certain cases, there has been rulings in favor of fair use and others not. So again, it's very fact specific and case specific in terms of, the interpretation of the fair use statute in particular. I am not a lawyer. So again, if you have specific legal questions, I would direct you to a lawyer. However, I think, kind of more broadly, the fact that the president did make, a comment on this, I think demonstrates to some extent the overall thinking of the executive branch, which is again kind of in line with this kind of overarching vision of innovation, which is, access to data is critical to AI innovation. I think there's, kind of this other conversation around when we're talking about kind of AI development and deployment and the race to kind of be the winner in AI, particularly as it relates to some of our adversarial folks overseas. There is concern that some of those countries don't necessarily have the same kind of legal regimes and frameworks in place for copyright protection. And because of that, they will be able to kind of achieve development and deployment faster. So I do think President Trump's remarks kind of illuminate that for us a little bit further. That being said, I think there have been some proposals on Capitol Hill specific to this issue. If I recall, I think Senator Hawley had put something forward. and a couple of other kind of judiciary hearings have been held on this topic. So I do think it's something that folks on the Hill are also investigating. But I mean, I think more broadly right now, right, we're still seeing the court cases unfold. So some of this will be kind of determined by what happens there. Certainly, I think, we'll have to see how it plays out. More generally, it's not at the Supreme Court yet or anything like that. Once we get there, if that were to happen, I think there would be obviously a different set of conversations where maybe, there would be congressional involvement if there was to be a change in statute, et cetera. But right now, definitely still a lot of activity at the individual kind of case level. And Margaret, you might have more information on some of the Hill related stuff in particular.
Great. Yeah, no, certainly one of the key areas, I think, if we're thinking about some of the top line areas where we might expect more activity from Congress, copyright issues is one that I would put near the top of the list, building on some of the permitting efforts, which, we talked about earlier, and then also looking at the federal preemption or federal framework would be sort of key follow-on areas where now that there's a bit more direction and specific guidance from the administration that I would anticipate to see Congress looking to engage. Well, since we're almost at the bottom of our hour together, just wanted to turn it over back to you, Zach, and then go over to Courtney. If you had any closing thoughts or there were any issues that we didn't talk about that you wanted to make sure you left people with before we end this session.
Yeah, no, thanks, Margaret. I think closing thoughts here on the two kind of pillars that I referenced earlier. First, just on government adoption, it really is great to see that the government is taking a more critical look and thinking about how it can kind of bring its technology infrastructure more in line with commercial best practices and that of the private sector, especially if you want to move with the speed you need to adopt these technologies and build the infrastructure for U.S. AI leadership abroad. You really need to make sure that your infrastructure, not just using the applications, but the data environment is, in place. On the, energy level, again, it's a solid foundation. I think it's important to also recognize that I think it's, Michael Kratsios mentioned that this is the next 6 to 12 months of what they see as, kind of the plan for, addressing these infrastructure challenges. So the work's going to continue. As ITI's perspective, we really look forward to seeing what the next phase of this plan is and working with the administration to kind of achieve their objectives. So I'll turn it over to Courtney for some closing thoughts of her own.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. I think, there were some areas that kind of weren't addressed in the action plan that we had laid out in our kind of OSTP comments initially. I think one of those major areas is privacy. So I do think there's still an opportunity here of course, there's a plethora of actions and activities that the executive branch will be trying to shepherd forward. But I do think, there is an opportunity to continue to work with Congress to advance, comprehensive federal privacy legislation and really recognize the key role that could play and also advancing innovation. So I just wanted to hit on that briefly. I mean, I think Zach mentioned this, but one of the interesting things is that, the AI action plan doesn't lay out kind of specific timelines associated with each of the actions. It's not like, within 30 days, this agency will do this, within 90 days, this agency will do that. There are some deadlines associated with the individual executive orders that we saw come out, but in the overall action plan, it's more of a kind of broad-based set of suggestions. So I think implementation will be really critical moving forward, right? Everybody always uses the phrase, the devil's in the details, but in many of these recommended policy actions, it will be the case that the devil will be in the details. So, I think we'll really look forward to continuing to work with the various agencies as they move forward to implement some of these efforts. And I think the final point I'll make is just that resourcing and capacity will be critical to actually achieving many of these goals. And so kind of in light of the overarching landscape that we see unfolding with regard to the federal government and some of the folks that have, been laid off or otherwise, there is, I think, still a really critical part of this that will need to be addressed, which is you need to have kind of the people and the resources in order to actually implement a lot of this. And so how that circle is squared, I think will be something we'll be paying attention to moving forward.
Well, that's a great place to leave this. I think the the key takeaway is now the hard work starts.
Yes.
So we here at ITI are certainly looking forward to continuing to engage. And thank you all for spending some of your Monday afternoon with us. And don't hesitate to reach out. Look forward to being in touch with all of you as the AI action plan gets underway.